Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on the fascinating world of near-death experiences, spirit communication, and all things metaphysical and spiritual. The mission of this project is to share messages of hope and inspiration with others, and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. Thank you for being here with an open heart and mind. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Magic is Real. I'm your host, Shannon, and today I have with me Tony Woody. And look at Tony. He's so handsome and dapper. Tony served 22 years in the Navy, correct? Is this correct information?
22
Flew
years.
flew as the flight engineer on the P3 Orion aircraft for over 20 years. In the year 1981 on the island of Oahu while stationed at the Barbers Naval Air Station, and after departing the runway at over 150 miles per hour in an aircraft incident during an emergency engine out landing, you had an intense out-of-body experience in the middle of the incident.
Right.
And 2 days later, you had your near-death-like experience and was in the light of your creator, who you call God. Welcome, Tony, and thank you so much for being here to share your story.
My pleasure. I'm glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's absolutely a pleasure for me too. So I'd love to start by, now I don't need my reading glasses anymore. I'd love to start by learning about you and how you grew up and what fostered your interest in military planes, Navy, all of it, but also
Okay.
anything that's relevant in terms of your spiritual or religious upbringing or lack of.
Okay.
Anything you'd like to share?
I grew up in a little town in East Texas called Elkhart. My whole family was, grew up there. My grandparents lived there, all of that. And grew up in the Southern Baptist fundamentalist religion. And at my first actual real experience that I ever had is something that I didn't understand, which I now know is spiritual, but I didn't know it at the time because I was just a little kid. We had these two little ponds on our property where we lived. And I grew up in Texas. There's a lot of snakes down there, right? Especially around ponds, and they're called cottonmouths or water moccasin is another name for them. Cottonmouth, because when they open up their mouth, it's a black looking snake and it's big. It can be as big around as a man's thigh. So they're big snakes. And when they open their mouth, it's white as it can be. It's cotton white. So that's how they got that name. And let me turn my phone off. Excuse me. Should have done that already. So I'm down there poking by the water at the tadpoles with a stick. And all of a sudden I had my hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this vision in my mind. There was a snake coiled up and he was getting ready to strike me in my back. And so I didn't panic, and I gradually put my hand out into the water because he's behind me, right? That's what I would think. And I leaned out on my hand away and then looked back. And when I did that, there he was. He was sitting right there, big fat cotton mouth. He started opening up his mouth, and I knew what was going to happen. And I bolted and just shot out across the water. It was a teardrop shaped pond. So at the end I was at, it was probably only 15, 20 feet across, maybe a foot or two deep there. And I bet you Jesus Christ didn't have anything on me, because I don't think my feet got wet when I went across the other side. And when he struck, I could feel the tip of something touch me on the neck. And so I'm terrified. I think I've been bitten. I'm 8 or 9 or 10-year-old kid, and I'm running wide open to the house as fast as I could get to the bathroom so I could look in the mirror at my neck. That's what I did. And then realized I was okay. And then I went out and when I played, as a kid, you just put that away and said, what was that? And you just go about your life. But I didn't go down to the pond for about a month either. So
Don't blame you.
So that's when that happened. And then I joined the Navy at 18 years old. And my last name is Woody, right? So I didn't know anything about the Navy at all. I didn't know that they had nicknames for their different commands, like the Blue Sharks or the Gray Knights or something like that. And I just had on my orders, when I got my first set of orders, all it said was Patrol Squadron 49. It doesn't give you a nickname, right? They don't do that on the orders. So when I check on board, that's when I find out that the detailer in Washington, D.C., the guy that writes your orders and cuts your orders, was probably having fun with me. And he thought it would be hilarious to send Airman Apprentice Woody to the VP 49 Woodpeckers for my first tour of duty.
Clever.
Yeah,
That's
I
such
was
a
not
boy thing
happy.
to do.
Like, this
Yeah.
is not going to go well for me. I'm thinking, this is going to be a rough time, just getting picked on all the time, right? And then, so when you first get to a squadron, they put you in a first lieutenant division where you do the crap jobs for a while until they put you in a real work center. And I was supposed to go work in the power plants division and start working on engines and props and learning all that, which I did later. But while I'm in there, the commanding officer comes in. He's in his flight gear. He's going to go flying. He's all happy. Happened to be just nobody in there but me and him at the time. And he makes his order, and I turn around, I get his stuff. And when I turn back around, I know he's not happy anymore, and I don't know what's wrong. But there's only me and him in there, so he's got to be mad at me, right? So I'm kind of, and what he had seen was my name stenciled on my pants on the back. And when I turned around, he's serious. He goes, son, just because you're in the VP 49 Woodpeckers doesn't mean you can't stencil your proper name on your uniform. His name was Commander Jake Tobin. I'll never forget this man. He changed my whole life, and I love him forever. And so I was terrified, couldn't even talk because I'm 18. I got my skipper mad at me, and I don't even,
Yeah.
And I pull my wallet out, and I just hand him my military ID card. I didn't know what else to do. And he takes it and he looks at it. He goes, "You mean I got a Woody and the Woodpeckers?"
That's great.
And so he's real happy. He hands me my card back, and on his way out the door, I blurted out the question, "Hey, Skipper, what's it like to fly one of those big old birds?" And he smiled at me and said, "Well, come with me, son, and I'll show you." And he hooked me up with the flight engineer. He gave me a flight suit and all of that. And I hang out with them for the next 2 hours on pre-flight. And I ask a billion questions because that's who I am. I want to know everything. And so I'm sitting behind the pilot seat in the flight station on a flat panel called the radar panel. There's just nothing there. It's just a place to sit, and the electronic gear is underneath you. And then the skipper's in the right seat, and the engineer's in the center seat facing forward. And I'm looking across at the skipper, and we're watching them start engines. And we taxi to the approach into the runway, and we're waiting to take off. And I'm like, should I be I'm the only one not strapped in a harness anywhere in my chairs. I didn't know anything. I'm getting ready to ask, what should I do? And about that time, the skipper turns to the engineer's seat. We're waiting because there's a plane coming in to land. So we've got about a 10-minute wait. And the skipper turns to the engineer and says, "What do you think? Should we put him in there?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. And the engineer goes, "Yeah." And apparently I'd been being assessed and not realizing it. And he unbuckles his harness, and the engineer gets out on the right side behind the skipper, and the skipper tells me to get in the seat. Next thing I know, I'm pushing power levers going down the runway. 2 hours earlier, I was selling hot dogs. Where else can you do that?
Right.
We get in the air, and the engineer's doing everything over my head with a checklist, right? And we finish the climb checklist and start the downwind. My skipper smacks me on the knee and says, "By the way, son, you can do that job." And I was hooked. And I sat in the seat for the next 4 hours, shooting touch and goes, having a ball. And that's when and then as soon as I got done at First Lieutenant Division, they put me straight in the flight engineer shop, and I started on the job training at 19 years old. And by the time I was 21 years old, I earned my wings, and I was signing for a 70-ton, 4-engine heavyweight airplane for the flight engineer duties. When I took them out on shorter flights by myself, it was anything 6 hours or less, you could go out with one engineer. And so I did that a lot. And at 24, I became an instructor flight engineer, and that's when I was stationed in Hawaii. And at the pinnacle of my career, there's a submarine hunting version platform of that aircraft with electronic package on board for tracking submarines. Then there's the spy plane version called the EP3, Electronic Surveillance and Reconnaissance Plane. And it has 29 people on board. And at the pinnacle of my career, I was the senior instructor flight engineer for the EP3 aircraft fleet for the United States Navy. And that's technically all positions that are in aviation have this one guy that's called Top Gun. That was what I did for that job.
That's really cool.
You were an instructor, and you wanted your instructor status or your annual check ride, you had to go through me.
See, this is why I ask about you before we launch into near-death out-of-body experiences, because I think everyone has a story that's interesting in itself. You as a human being are an interesting person. So I like to get to know you and hear interesting stories
as we segue into the spiritual stuff, because I just am fascinated with people who've lived all of these lives, and we've all had different experiences. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's my
I,
pleasure.
yeah, so,
So
okay.
1980, it was actually
Yeah, let's,
1982 in Hawaii when I had the incident, because that was during a RIMPAC exercise, Rim of the Pacific. That's the largest military exercise on the planet. And it's so big, it takes 2 years to prepare for it. And they only do it every 2 years. And it was my crew's turn to go out and do our mission for that. And we took off, going to go out for a 12-hour mission. So we had max allowable takeoff weight, full bag of fuel, everything. We were maxed out everywhere. And climbing out, get to about 10,000 feet of altitude and get a chip slide on #1 engine. It means it's making some metal or fuzz or something in the gearbox or the engine, and you got to shut it down because you don't know if you can have it could cause a catastrophic failure if you don't. And then that's it, mission's over, time to go back. But we have too much fuel, and so we have to dump some fuel, but we can't dump all we want. To give you an idea of the difference in the amount of fuel we had on board when we landed, and because you're heavier, you have to fly faster to have more lift to keep you in the air so you don't stall and crash, right? So we're coming in hot because we're way faster than normal. Typically, we would land with a minimum of 8,000 pounds of fuel on when we got over the airfield. That was our minimum on top fuel. That day, we still had 42,000 pounds on board when we landed. So we're coming in and landing at about 135 knots, which is way faster than normal. We usually land about 100, maybe a little over 110. And because we're doing an emergency landing, they have pre-positioned 6 fire trucks on the side of the runway, 2 at the beginning, 2 in the middle, 2 at the other end. And as you go by them, they pull in behind you, and the next group pulls in behind them as you go by, and so on. Hopefully nothing happens, but they're right there in case there's something goes wrong. And that day it was actually not good because when we departed, well, we're coming into land and everything looked normal. We gave the emergency landing brief, expected a swerve to the right because you got 2 engines on one side, giving reverse thrust over 1 on the left because you got the outboard #1 engine shut down on the left side. So you expect a swerve to the right and you can counter with the rudder. Well, he used incorrect rudder. And at those speeds, we departed the runway pretty much immediately after the nose gear came down. And I kept thinking he was going to correct, but he didn't. And we're going straight at one of the fire trucks. And then that's when I had immense terror. I knew I was about to die, that there was no doubt in my mind we were going to slam into that on the right wing. And I could see it coming. And it was an immense terror. And you will be astonished at how much goes through your mind when you know you've only got a few seconds left. It's astonishing. So as that started happening, I started seeing things in slow motion, and I could see the guy on the water cannon on the top of the airplane, of the fire trucks, screaming. He's in the silver suit with the big clear, the square open shielded mask face, you know what I mean?
yep.
And couldn't hear him, of course, but I could see him screaming and ducking, trying to get his head down. And the right wingtip went over the fire truck and the #4 propeller. At that point, I had an out of body experience too. And I'm out of the airplane and I could see the propeller blade spinning on the outboard on #4. And it gapped the front corner of that fire truck with 2 of the blades. Missed it on the back side, and the next one missed it on the front side. That's how close we were to the fire truck. I could see that. And then I saw this Pepsi, and then we started tooling across the runway, or the asphalt between the runways, and we're screaming, smoking through this area. It's not supposed to be there. Airplanes don't land there. They don't ever taxi there, none of that. It's just asphalt, right? And we ended up heading at an angle all the way over toward the other runway. There's parallel runways. We landed on runway 040 left. And when that started happening, the co-pilot started screaming to tell him to get the pilot to get on the brakes, yelled at him 3 times. And when he finally woke up enough to get on the brakes, because I think he was just in shock of what was happening, he jammed on the reverse thrust again and hammered on the brakes. And I saw this, because we're in an area that's not, airplanes and stuff don't go, there's some probably a little trash and stuff out there every now and then. They don't clean all that up every day like they do the runways. They do 5 walk downs on the runways for an object debris walk down every day, but not the asphalt between. And so this Pepsi can flew up in front of the windshield. It went from left to right. See it tumbling. That's all slow motion. I'm watching the fluid come out of it and atomize slowly. And then I started focusing on the little bits of atomization. And the next thing and then we went past that, and the airplane was throwing all this dust and debris up in the air. And I started experiencing the location of every one of these items in the air. Didn't matter what it was. And it's all wrapping around and rolling, and I'm at all of these locations, and I'm totally freaking confused. I don't have a clue what's going on. I don't know if I'm dead already. I don't know what's happening, and I don't understand it. And there's nothing in the flight manual on what to do when you're running off the runway, having a spiritual experience in the middle of an engine out emergency landing. Just nothing in the book on that one. And so when we ended up lurching up and on the right runway, the runway 4 right, with a starboard main mount, the right main mount, and the nose gear got up, and there's a little slope there for the rain to run off, and the left wheel is off the runway still. And we're sitting here like this when we finally got stopped. But when the plane lurched to a stop, all of these things that were happening outside of me just kind of went. And I'm sitting there going, what the hell was that? Right? And I'm sitting there, the engines are running, and I'm like, and I look at Lieutenant Duffy on my right, and he looks at me, and I'm trying to express what happened, but I don't know how. And because all I could say was, did you see that? And he's like, yeah, like I was,
right.
Like, you know what I mean? But I didn't know how to explain what was going on. And then about that time, I heard this. So I'm looking to the right, and Lovegren, the Lieutenant Lovegren, the pilot that gooned the landing, great pilot, but he gooned the landing that day. He's all stressed out and still on an adrenaline rush, and I didn't know that till I heard this sound going woo, woo, right? I didn't know what that was. So I turned, and then I saw Duffy's eyes move past mine to look at the noise, and it was Lieutenant Lovegren. And I turn and look, and he is just white knuckling the yoke, still got his hands on there, and he's trying to say something, and he goes, woo, woo, and he finally goes, what the did I do wrong?
Poor guy.
Right. And so, and then a couple of minutes later, all the fire trucks caught up to us. And while I was outside, I could see all the fire trucks chasing, trying to catch up. I saw all of that, right? I saw everything. And got to the hangar after we got off the runway and realized the plane was okay, and defueled the plane, and I went home, and I'm just befuddled. And then that's before I left, I realized I was on the flight schedule again the next day.
Oh, lovely.
And the skipper took me and the Lieutenant Lovegren out again. And I hadn't never heard of PTSD. I didn't know what any of that was. I didn't understand any of that. So I get in the airplane and take off. Everything's fine. Coming into that same runway on that same approach from the very day before, and I start experiencing post-traumatic stress and didn't understand what was going on. So I knew instinctively that if the skipper saw that, I would probably be grounded and maybe not ever fly again. So normally I would sit up in my seat, and then one of my jobs is to push the power levers up if we have to wave off for whatever reason, a truck on the runway, deer, dog, whatever, you never know. So that would be my job. And I would normally just sit up and watch and have an 180 degree commanding view of the approach through the windshields, and then sit there like that and monitor everything until they call for a power application. But that day I couldn't look outside. So I leaned forward because my skipper's right here on my right. So if I'm leaning forward, he can't see my face. All he can see is kind of like this side of my head. And so I've got my hand on the power lever, and I'm acting like I've got my head in the game, and what's really going on is I'm freaking out. Bless you. And I had to do that, went through that like 2 or 3 landings. And I just convinced myself, I said, Tony, you've had thousands of landings. By then I had 3,500 hours flight time. So I'm like, you've got thousands of landings. You need to get your head in the game and get back to work. And that's literally what I said to myself. And I just decided I wasn't going to feel that way anymore. And it was fine after that. I never had that problem again. And then the next day, that was a Monday, was the day we ran off the runway. Tuesday was the refly. Wednesday, this sounds totally unrelated, but I'm watching a TV show that night with my wife, my son, he was like almost 3 years old, called That's Incredible. And they had an
Oh, I
episode.
remember that. I forgot about that show.
They had an episode on there called what was the name of that? It was about a guy named Leslie Lemke, Lemke, and you can look that up on YouTube and find it. It's still there, that whole video. And he was extremely autistic or something like that, but he was born, his mother adopted him, and she was telling her story on the show where she was told by Spirit that soon she would be offered an opportunity to adopt a baby, a boy, and she's to take the one that's blind. There was three chances, or there were going to be 3 opportunities, but she's to take the blind one, and she did that. That happened. And as he grew up, it became clear he had no cognitive skills or abilities, and he was going to have to be taken care of all of his life. And so one night she said she heard music downstairs and she thought somebody left the TV or the radio on. She gets up to go downstairs, and this guy hasn't ever really spoken or talked much or anything all of his life. Here he is sitting at the piano, playing gospel music and singing with an absolutely beautiful voice. And then they called him out and had him do that. And I was just stunned. I knew I was seeing a miracle. And so that night I went to sleep and said just a simple prayer, 30-second prayer in my head. I didn't even get on my knees or even say it out loud, so what do you expect from something like that? You don't really expect much, right? Careful what you ask for. And so that night I went to sleep right after that. And the next thing I know, there was no warning, no anything. I went from being in a dead sleep to boom, I'm in a, I later, decades later, learned the name of the place. It's called the Great Silent Chamber. And it's also called the Throne Room of Infinite Life. And that's where God took me. And I was witnessing the liquid, molten, golden, white, living light of God unfolding into that gigantic lotus flower, infinitely graceful. And I said 3 words. I said, oh my goodness. And the instant I said the word goodness, divine goodness, the essence of goodness exploded through me, ripped through every bit of me. And the whole time I'm being blasted with unconditional love that's on a cosmic scale. I had no idea love could be like that at all. And excuse me. It just overwhelmed me. I couldn't even consciously think. And then after goodness, I experienced infinite bliss, ecstasy, joy, peace, harmony, everything positive. And there was absolutely no sound there whatsoever. I know people meditate. If all those out there that meditate, if you think you're in a perfectly quiet room, are you really? You hear the room tick somewhere in the room, something moved, the weight of the house, something. Everything shifts here. You hear your own heartbeat, you hear your own breathing. Can't ever not hear that if you're meditating, right? That place has no sound at all. That is God's peace, and it is never going to be interrupted by the chaos of mankind, of anything negative whatsoever. Is simply not allowed. It is compelled to be of the same qualities of the light itself when you are in the presence. There's no other options. And it's infinite love, infinite unconditional. First of all, it was infinite power, flat out infinite power that was perfectly balanced and under absolute control, and you knew it. And then it was infinite wisdom and intelligence. They're one and the same because you can't have one without the other. And then it was infinite unconditional love. So that didn't fit with my teachings I grew up with in East Texas. And I had to reassess everything because the foundation of what I thought was reality was just gone. And so where was I? So I'm that's going
You're
on.
back.
Yeah. And then I saw these hands in, kind of peripheral vision that were out there. I didn't care about them. I recognized them. I'm focusing on the light. That's all I cared about because that's all you can think about. I had a wife and a child in the room next door, in the next room over, and never even considered them. You can't. It's just your mind is overwhelmed with the experience. It's unbelievable. And so what happened after that? So I've got my hands up. I mean, I didn't know they were my hands. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I had sat up in bed, and I'm seeing is the black void with the golden white liquid light pouring out in all directions in the entire cosmos, and these hands show up. Didn't care. And then after that happened, the peripheral vision of the room started coming in, and then I could tell the wall was still there. I mean, was not there. The light was there. It was about a 10-foot circle of the wall. It was at the foot of my bed on the other side of the room. There was no wall. It was the light. And on the other side of that was my son's crib where he slept, and in the other room. And so yeah, I'm sorry. I lose track sometimes because it just overwhelms my memory of what happened.
No, it's actually beautiful.
So I can see the hands, and then I see the room, and then I realize my wife's feet are positioned in a manner that she had her back to me. You could tell that, right? And I'm wondering, how come she's not awake? This is like a billion stars in the room. How could she sleep through all of this? And then that's when it hit me that this is real. I've got God in my bedroom, and this is really happening. And the moment I understood that, and God knew I knew, the light didn't go away instantly, but it just kind of closed down in about 2 to maybe 3 second time frame until it went away. And then it broke my heart because all I wanted was the light to come back. And I sat there. There was this undulation of energy still in the wall because it's still dark. It's like 3:30 in the morning or something like that. We called it dark 30 in the military. And all I wanted was for the light to come back. I just begged it to come back and cried till the sun came up for a couple of hours. And then my wife wakes up and she doesn't know what's wrong. And I tried to tell her, and she believed me, but at the same time, she didn't want me talking to anyone about it,
Right.
And that showed up later. First, the following Sunday, I went to the church where we were going at Waianae Baptist Church in the western end of the island where we were living at Makaha Valley. And I asked the pastor after it was done, I tried to express it to him. And I'm emotionally, you got to remember, I was, a strong, fit military guy doing stuff that most people would just dream of. And that's not what we do, just go talk to a pastor and pour our eyes out trying to express what happened. So I was able to get it out, and he understood what I was saying. And he just tilted his head and looked at me with an odd expression, turned his back on me and walked off. Left me standing there. So first I was shocked and just felt abandoned and shocked. And then after that, I went to another church the next week. My wife's with me. This is a bigger church. Excuse me. This is a bigger church, much bigger. And a lot of the military went there, but it was the first time I'd ever been there. So they had this period of time where they say, hey, anyone have any concerns? And I want to know what happened to me. So I'm thinking I can get my answer at the church, right? I didn't know. And so I'm getting ready to get up, and my wife grabs my arm, my hand, right here with both her hands. She's literally pulling me down. And the whole church saw this. And I'm like, what? At first I was like, what? And then I told her, I just yanked my arm away and said, let go of me. The whole church heard that. because I'm going to get my answer. I needed an answer, and that wasn't going to stop me. And so I asked my question and got it out again, but he gave me some lame answer that I can't remember anymore, but I knew it didn't fit. And that's when I realized I wasn't going to get the answer in the church anymore, but I didn't know what to do. Then I go outside to leave after church is over, and this lieutenant commander from another squadron who knew I was aviator too, came over to me and told me I probably ought not talk about that anymore, because if the Navy finds out, they're probably going to kick me out of the Navy and get rid of my security clearance and all of that, and I'd never fly again. So I clam up. What do you do? You know, but it didn't mean I stopped wondering or trying to figure out what happened or any of that. So over the next decades of years, I've been seeking answers and been finding them too.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what you're finding. I also want to discuss the fact that I've interviewed so many near-death experiencers, and all of them, most of them that have had sudden accidents, or they've been hit by something, or it's not this prolonged illness or something.
Right.
They've all told me that their soul left their body before just before the impact. Right. So
no pain involved in the mind. Yeah. That's
right. And to me, and I want to hear your thoughts, of course, it sounds like you technically did have a near-death experience. You just didn't actually you didn't actually die.
There's a name for that. It's called a near-death like
experience. But
the symptoms of the experience and the after effects are all the same. There are profound after effects when someone's had a near-death experience. And decades later, I was a woman named Lilia got in touch with me. Excuse me. And she was involved in a group of people that were working with Johns Hopkins University, and they were preparing a article with the Voices magazine. That's the magazine that does a quarterly article for Johns Hopkins and has been doing so for decades. And it's called A Narrative Inquiry in Bioethics. They do one each quarter on a different topic. In March of 2020, this article came out, and it's called, and you can Google these words and download it for free. It's called Healthcare After a Near-Death Experience. You Google those words, you will find that article, and there are 18 people's stories in that article. Mine is one of them, and 2 of the stories are military, the rest are civilian sector personnel, and some of those civilians, one's a NASA scientist, things like that. There's a doctor who said, I was an atheist before, but not anymore.
Wow, yeah, it's incredible. It really also, it speaks to when you're about to die, even though you didn't actually think, you at the last minute it turned around, but the fact is your soul left, so it didn't have to feel that impact or whatever other reasons that you think it happened. But then I also have heard a lot about once your soul leaves your body like that, you're so much more connected to the other side because your soul remembers who it is. And
I know who I am.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's why a few nights later, it opened up so easily for you. Is that your take on it? I mean,
I never really thought about that. I knew they were connected, but I just couldn't explain how. I wouldn't begin to even try that, because that's God's business. He's the one that knows how to do that.
Yeah.
So I couldn't begin to tell you how, because I'm not, I don't have those abilities.
Right.
But I want them.
It happens a lot where people have one out of body or one near death experience, and then it just happens again and again, sometimes multiple times, because they're
I've had other experiences since. I've had one in 2018.
I was going to ask you, that was my question. So, can you share that one as well?
Actually, I can, but let me grab this.
Yeah.
Just drafted this up. I can find it. What did I do with it? Here we go. I call this the Rosalind incident, and I wrote this out, so I'm just going to read it because it.
Please do. Yeah, that sounds great.
And it's with a series of text messages too on my phone. And I sent them to you, but I can't really show them on the,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
but I can read them for you.
please do.
So this happened in October of 2018. And I was telling my massage therapist, who was 7 months pregnant at the time, and her name is Rosalind, about these books I'd been studying from the St. Germain Foundation. And I found a page in one of the books that described perfectly what happened to us. And then later, I couldn't find it, the picture that I'd sent her, and because I couldn't find it. I've got 20 books, so I couldn't find it again, you know. And so she didn't answer. And then later I found it before she could answer, and I sent it to her. And this is a story of how that happened. And then you'll hear the back and forth conversation where she's validating that this happened to us. She's not saying, you know, anyway, I'll just read it. The information I'm giving you proves God recently acted overtly in my life, my massage therapist Rosalind's life, as well as her unborn son still in her womb, all at the same time. I provide tangible evidence that happened to us with screenshot pictures off my cell phone that I believe proves God is real. The text messages are between me and my massage therapist, proving God acted overtly in our lives and to my life and another person with me. Some would believe I'm crazy for saying that. I've shown this information to dozens of people over the years since it happened to us. Everyone I've shown the text messages between me and Rosalind to over the years have all walked away in astonishment thus far. No one to date could have or has ever been able to claim it was anything other than a divine encounter with God. A few years ago, while getting a massage from my massage therapist, Rosalind, who was 7 months pregnant at the time with a baby boy Noah, I was telling her about St. Germain's series of books called the I Am Discourses that I was studying at the time. I still am, and the books explain how the laws of life in the universe actually work. The claim if a person practices the spiritual principles given in the books over time, at some point they will prove themselves to be true and spiritual manifestations will occur. That's exactly what they did for me. This is what happened. During the massage, Rosalind was working on my right hip while I was lying face up on the massage table, allowing us to talk face to face at that moment, and I was excited. While I was telling Rosalind, I had found a line in one of my books describing the light exactly how it looked when I had my experience in the light back in 1982 while in the Navy stationed in Hawaii. I was asked to write that story, and it was included in the Johns Hopkins article, which I told you about. Anyway, the book's called The Light, a liquid, molten, golden, white, living light. And the instant I said the word light to Rosalind, the infinite power of divine peace and love suddenly blasted through me, Rosalind, and her unborn son, Noah. I suddenly felt the light of God expanding outward from inside my entire body, while also enfolding my entire being from within with infinite divine love and peace. This went on for many seconds, which is a really long time for something like that to happen. Before it happened, I had my head lifted up off the table while talking to Rosalind with excitement about what I was going to tell her. And that's when the power of God's love hit me with full force. And all I could do was drop my head on the table while crying tears of joy pouring from my eyes uncontrollably. I literally had no control anymore. I couldn't talk, physically move, or even think. I felt the light powerfully and dynamically enfold every cell in my body, envelop my conscious mind, and fill my soul with immense divine peace and love, and it felt wonderful. When it was over, I wiped my eyes so I could see better and looked up at Rosalind. She was already looking down wide-eyed, open, with her eyes wide open, looking at me, and she appeared just as shocked as I was about what just happened. Her face like mine was soaking wet with a flood of tears too. So when I saw that she'd been crying, I immediately asked her, "Did you feel that?" And she said, "Uh-huh." And Noah did too. She knew that somehow because he was in her womb still. She could feel it. Weeks later, I found a page in one of the books I studied that explained exactly what happened to us. So I took a picture of it and texted it to her. A long while later on, I told her I'd lost that picture and texted her to ask if she could send it back to me. But before she could answer back, I found it and texted it back to her again. The screenshots below are of the text messages of the conversation we had that clearly show both of our responses back and forth to one another regarding our divine encounter together. I think it is very obvious what I just described actually happened to us due to the wording responses back and forth in the text messages, because Rosalind isn't texting back saying things like, "I don't know what you're talking about. you're crazy, don't ever contact me again, or you need to go see a psych doctor or anything like that at all. She's validating that the event actually happened to us. And here's your tangible proof. And by the way, in the light, we are all one. There's no such thing as separation. Thus, what we do to one, we do to everyone. So here's what I said to her. Hi, Rosalind. You remember that page of information I texted to you a long while back describing what happened to me, you, and Noah when the infinite power of divine peace blasted through all three of us the last time I got a massage from you? I've somehow lost it in my phone, and I'm hoping you can send it to me again. Please let me know if you're able to do so. To do that for me so I can try to find it elsewhere if necessary. I hope you're doing well, my eternal friend in the life. God bless you and your family. But before she could answer, I found it and sent it to her. Maybe you can see that. And so said that, and she puts a heart emoji by it, right? I'll read that to you in a second so you know what happened to us. Then she says, I love this, and it's so relevant for me now. And I said, me too. It's a deep comfort knowing we are watched over, and in the end, everything and everyone will be raised into that state of perfect peace we each had blast through us 3 years ago. That moment we experienced is seared into my consciousness. I'm pretty sure it did that to you too. God bless you and her family. And she answers back with, God bless you and your family, Tony. I'm grateful to know you.
That's
that
beautiful.
really happened.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
And you had
God.
said what does
I
it
read
say?
that. Yeah, I want to read
just
that. Yeah.
reminding you of that.
Let me read what it said. When we come, meaning we with a capital, these are divine concepts. When we come to charge you with more of the power and victory of the sacred fire. Therefore, you will be enfolded in more of that sacred fire from our octave. At the same time, your own mighty I am presence will expand more of its sacred fire through you to bring you permanent illumination, inner and outer. When I say inner and outer, I mean not only your mental and feeling world, but the actual flesh structure of your bodies and the atmosphere about you. These things have to be accomplished gradually because in your present vibratory action of the outer world, you could not stand the sudden charge of all the power of the sacred fire that is around our ascended master bodies. That's what happened.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, since this has happened to you, I know you've been on a whole quest and there's still more and more to be learned all the time. What is it that anything you want to share about what you have discovered, what you have found, and what you want to share with what you want people to know?
Well, the place I was taken to was pure energy. And after that happened, I had to look at it from that perspective first, because that's the source. So how did all that pure energy become all of this? And then over decades, 30 plus years, I've been seeking answers, and I went through all kinds of religions. As soon as I found something that didn't fit with what I experienced, because I knew the standard, because I was there. I know a state of perfection exists because I experienced it. So that was, how do you reach the state of perfection, right? When you know it's there. I didn't know how to do this anymore. So I needed answers. And I needed to know where I went and what that was. And I got all those answers after Lilia contacted me. And she told me about the St. Germain Foundation and the I Am discourses. And I started studying those, and they perfectly describe how the energy comes through us, and we are co-creators with that energy. But this is all a process, and we're all being raised up into a higher state of consciousness. And it's about the nature of our consciousness in relation to divinity. And our octave of existence, frequency, consciousness is thought, which is frequency. It's all energy. And so once I understood that, and I looked at it from that perspective, then how can then what? So these books explain what mankind does is we constantly requalify the perfect energy coming to us and through us with our discordant thoughts, and we create chaos. If you don't believe that, look at the state of the world. Okay, God never does that. It's perfected. It's all perfection and peace and harmony and all of that. So these books teach how to draw in the light to hopefully achieve my ascension the original divine way one day without ever having to go through that thing called death again. And I know what the beginnings of ascension feel like. And that's what happened to myself and Rosalind and Noah.
Wow.
Ascension's real.
Yeah. Ever since this has happened to you, when you're just going through the world and living your life now, how often would you say you have these? I'm sure it's always ever present, the knowing of who you are, the understanding of the universe, and obviously there are things we still don't know.
A lot I don't know.
Yeah, I know that we won't know
I'm
until
claiming I
we're
know everything at all.
yeah, we won't know until we're there.
Well, I was there, and when I was there, I was one with everything, and I didn't need to know anything.
Right,
And I was
right.
home. I knew I was home. That was my real home, and I knew it.
And now, has it been difficult coming back to this
Over
world for you?
time, right at the beginning, it was very hard. I mean, that's what that article was all about. It was talking about the Johns Hopkins article, Healthcare After Near-Death Experiences, talking about the profound after effects that people have when they have a near-death experience. And it can be worse if frontline providers don't understand how to interact with someone that just had one or could have just had one. Instead of marginalizing them or poo-pooing them and said, oh, that was just lack of oxygen or something, or it was the medication or whatever. Well, they don't have an answer for me. I was wide awake sitting in a flight engineer's seat of a 70-ton airplane when it happened to me. Okay, so none of that fits either of those explanations. And so they need to understand as frontline providers, police, doctors, clergy, all of them, that, and that's the purpose of this article, is to say, hey, all you frontline providers, read these people's stories, see where we failed them and we made it worse and impacted them with another moral injury on top of everything they were dealing with. It just destroyed a lot of lives. And all they need to do is just validate it. They don't even have to believe that, just validate it. So, oh, that's interesting. Wow, tell me all about it. You must have been amazed. Those are the kind of things you need to hear back, and just let them express it. And then they'll go away feeling like somebody listened instead of what happened to me.
Right, because whether
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if they, like you said, if they believe it or not, even if it weren't real, which it is, but even if it weren't real, it doesn't
It
matter.
still needs to be handled the same way.
Yeah.
And whether or not they believe it or not, they still need to handle it in the same way. So they need to standardize this procedure for people that's had an experience and get that out. It's all about education, and get it out to the frontline providers all over the world so that they can see this and start learning and create better standards for dealing with people in emergency situations that could have possibly had an experience.
Absolutely. Do you find now, in your regular life, do you have mystical experiences? Do you have knowings? Do you feel more?
I get that all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I would
I get
assume.
deja vu moments, and I know something shifted and changed.
Yep.
Just because your life, you have beliefs, you understand where the universe is, doesn't mean we don't get our challenges. And still have a hard time in life. I've had all kinds of challenges that I believe God brought me into this mission because He knows I'm a relentless warrior and I don't ever give up.
Right.
Not going to happen. And so consequently, I have 4 FBI investigations going on and with the VA medical system and other stuff. I found a lot of corruption with the civilian sector. It uncovered them all to the point where an acting VA secretary at the time was involved in the cover-up. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm a child of God, and I'm going to go do the next right thing. And it doesn't matter what I'm going through. That's irrelevant.
good for you.
Do it, get it done, because that's what God. And I don't resent anyone that did these things to me, because I love them all, because I know who they are too.
Yeah.
But if God called upon me to be an instrument of someone else's love lessons, then I'm going to give it my all.
That's really well said. In summation, what is the main thing that you want people to know?
Go be love. There's nothing else to do after that. Let it happen. The love is the most powerful thing in existence. That's what that infinite power that I experienced was. love is literally infinitely powerful and has no limitations at all.
Beautiful, Tony. Tony Woody, thank you so much for being here with me, sharing your energy and your insights with me, but for more importantly, for sharing it with my audience and with the world and the work you're doing. I know as a military person, that can be, it's such a, it's unexpected. And I think that by your speaking out, especially, it might and hopefully does change some hearts and minds. Not that we're out there recruiting anybody, but just to spread the message that this isn't all there
Don't know
is.
who they are. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Start
remember
your own
who they
journey.
are.
That's it. Just,
Yeah,
you don't seek, you don't find, ever.
beautiful. Thank you again, Tony. It was so nice to have
God
you with
bless.
me.
My pleasure.
God bless you too.